Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, thank you very much, Professor Dr. Shamil Rajal, or Institute of Islamic Studies. This conference is organized by the Institute of Islamic Studies with the collaboration of Islamic Economics and Finance Department. Our speaker, Professor Dr. Mabid Al-Jarhi, he is the founder of Center of Islamic Economics and Finance at ASKU, Social Science University of Ankara. He is also founder of our department. This speech will be about the fundamental theory of Islamic economics, the missing link between time preference on commodities and the rate of interest. Our conference will be live on YouTube of our university also. After our professor's speech, it will be session for question and answer. Inshallah, when you ask your questions in the YouTube or here, and then we will, inshallah, professor will try to respond. Please, Professor, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Abdurrahman Eliasji. And I am really grateful for those who are attending this lecture. I am also grateful for ASBO and its International Center for Islamic Economics for sponsoring this lecture. We will talk about the fundamental theory of Islamic economics, and what we are going to talk about in particular is the missing gap between commodity time preferences and the rate of interest. And once we prove that there is a missing gap there, then all interest rate theories would fall down. I hope you see my screen. Would someone let me know that my screen is being available and seen for?
Yes, Professor. Please continue, Professor. Yes.
All right. So I just want to start with some dua. اللهم هب لنا فتحا قريبا سهلا طيبا مباركا فيه نفحة من علمك وحكمك وقبس من نورك وهداك وسعة من توفيقك وسدادك ورزق من العمل الصالح الخالص لك وحدك لا شريك لك والعلم النافع ننفع به عقيدتك ودينك وسائر عبادك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد سيد الخلق ومن سن بسنته إلى يوم الدين. Now why in which field are we talking now in Islamic economics? Islamic economics now has expanded and it has so many fields. So which field are we talking about now? The fiqh of Islamic economics is a field that has been exclusive, almost exclusive to the fuqaha, and the field of history of Islamic economic thought has been also popular, and many people. We have one of its scholars with us now. That's Dr. Abdurrahman Yusri. We have also Dr. Shashi and many others. And then we have also the economic history of Muslims as a field, and we have Islamic analytical economics, and this is the field and this is the core of Islamic economics, and this is the field in which we are going to talk about now. And we have also Islamic economic philosophy, and this is probably the field that many Islamic economics has focused on since the middle of the last century. Now we want to ask why a fundamental theory and what is it? Islamic economics is a revolution against market capitalism. It starts with interest prohibition or riba. The classical and new classics have theories of interest. Karl Menger and then his student Bombaverk and Irving Fisher. New classical loanable funds is also with us here. Unfortunately, Keynes' liquidity preference has marred the generality of his theory because it is also another form of interest rate theories. Our first step is to debunk, the first step of Islamic economics, I claim, is to debunk the theories of interest as an intellectual basis for Islamic economics. So this should have been our first step, and it should have come maybe in the first half of the 20th century, but we didn't do that. But we say better late than never. So let us do it. Let's start. The early doubts about the rate of interest can be shown in the rate of interest as the source of two inefficiencies. Samuelson in 58 and Friedman in 1969 pointed out to an important inefficiency of the interest rate, saying that the positive interest rate would lead to substituting real resources for money. And of course, that would be very inefficient. Hossius inefficiency, my interpretation of it, which is not a common interpretation, it says that the absence of information specialists in finance reduces the volume of exchanges below optimum. So this is my interpretation. And of course, we have, if we had a properly implemented Islamic finance, then Islamic banks would operate as information specialists. Of course, this does not exist now, but we could get rid of this efficiency this way. The generally ignored these two inefficiencies are generally ignored in the literature. So we have an alternative, and we will try to present a model with realistic assumptions in order to counteract the theories of interest. So we have an imperfect information model with credit. Now this runs radically against the new classical model. Why? Because the new classical model is a perfect information model and it ignores credit. So non-neoclassical and non-homogeneity assumptions that we make in the beginning. Heterogeneous individuals and heterogeneous commodities. So our axioms would be like the same individual has different rates of time preference for different commodities. In other words, we have commodity heterogeneity. And we have, for different individuals, we, as an axiom, we have different RTPs for commodities, so that we have a heterogeneity of individual preferences. So this is a purely, completely non-neoclassical model. In a world of costly information or price searching, people and firms interact during search activities, so resulting in an emergent phenomena. Now, this is what has been ignored by neoclassical economics. Aggregation of the rates of time preference into a social rate of time preference would be impossible. And that's actually the basic concept behind the rate of interest. It's a representation of some kind of a social rate of time preference. So a similar case of this failure of aggregation is the Sonnenschein-Mantel-Debrow conditions for the aggregate market demand. These conditions deal with the aggregation of individual demand to market demand. And it was discovered by by William Gorman in 1953. So now I hope Dr. Abdurrahman would watch for people coming to the meeting and I'm getting notices to admit people, but I'm not the chairman of the meeting.
Okay, Professor, please. I am dealing.
So, Professor, yeah, you kindly take care of it. So, Schaeffer and Sonnenschein in 1982, Mantel and Debrow after that have spoken about this, but the interpretation later on came out, and we know about these conditions. It says that a market downward slope demand curve is possible under two conditions. All consumers have the same preference map, and that boils down to a case of only one consumer. And second, that the preferences do not change with income. In other words, we have homothetic commodities, which means that they are consumed in a constant ratio of income, and these commodities do not exist. Imagine if you're a per person consuming 2% of your income on bread, or spending 2% of your bread. If you become a rich person, you cannot spend 2% of your income on your bread. So aggregation is possible only with one consumer and one commodity, and obviously this is a trivial case. So this is a very critical, because the new classics say that the market demand is a horizontal summation of individual demands. Also, market supply is a horizontal summation of supply curves. So Sonnenschein-Mantel-Debrow or SMD condition would say that this horizontal summation is true only when we have homogeneous people and homothetic commodities, and this is a trivial and false case. So price changes would trigger new search for households and firms, and we have unpredictable shape of market demand and supply curves. They look like this. So actually, the pride.
Recording.
Excuse me. The pride of neoclassical theory, that's the law of demand and the law of supply, has been demolished. We don't have these laws anymore, except for individual firms and individual households. So we don't even have a unique equilibrium, nor do we have a stable equilibrium, because that's what, except in the trivial case of one individual and one commodity. So there is no single rate of time preference for intertemporal allocation that's valid for all individuals and all commodities. So this is our launching pad. Prices are unrelated to the rates of time preferences. Of course, we can see that the rate of time preferences cannot be summarized into one aggregate similar to the price index. Pricey items may have low RTP and vice versa. So the price has no relationship with time preference. So if we, in order to concretely imagine this, if we had a rate of interest which is equal to 10%, then $10,000 today would be equal to 11,000 after a year. Now this $10,000 would have many combinations of commodities with different weights and different weighted average RTP. And this would not be equal to the rate of interest. So this is a combination of commodities, one of the many combinations of commodities that we can buy for $10,000. In the future, after 1 year, we also have the same thing, many combinations that we can buy for $11,000 a year from today, and their weighted average RTB would not be equal to the rate of interest. And this is a picture, one of the pictures of that. So we can see here that concretely we must doubt this idea of an average rate of RTP. So in a model of N commodities and M individuals, our quantities of goods purchased by individuals would be a matrix of xt, and that would, with elements of xij of t, for N commodities and M individuals. So people are mortal. We are assuming that people are mortal with unpredictable lifespans, and present consumption is more certain. So a household has set a rate of time preference that would be equal to the matrix of AT, and with an element of AIJ of T for I am being warned that my meeting will end in 10 minutes. So I am referring this to the...
No, Professor, please continue. It is the university...
It's a force. Okay, I hope so. So we have here, say, the matrix of time preferences. Each element would be equal to the value or the quantity of the equivalent quantity of in the future, in the following period, minus, which would be higher than the equivalent quantity at present, divided by the current quantity, and that would be the rate of time preference as we define it. So interest rate theories imply that the relation between present and future money reflects those RTPs between commodities. Our time preference for money is summarized. Our time preference for commodities is summarized by the rate of interest. Interest between present and future money is some average of rates of the time preferences of all commodities traded by all individuals. This is quite a bold, quite a heroic conclusion which nobody has proved. So let us test whether such implication is correct. So, and that's one way to debunk the theories of the rate of interest. And we must remember here that the commodity, we have several matrices, 3 matrices, the commodity matrix S and the time preference matrix of Y, and also the price matrix P. So, or PT. So we can say that the total money spent on commodities at T would be equal to, that's for the whole economy, MT, which is PT YT. This sounds like or looks like the quantity or the exchange equation, but it does not equal, MT is here is not, does not equal to the money supply because the velocity cannot be equal to 1. So we are not saying the same thing. And in proper Islamic finance, markups are negotiated. Now here we are imagining the ideal implementation of Islamic finance, where people, when they go to an Islamic bank, they negotiate the markup. It is not imposed on them. Or so in each household, and that's our way of introducing credit in our economy. Each our household purchase against deferred payment, negotiating a markup that's equal to Mij of T. So aggregate expenditures on deferred plus stop payment or plus spot payments would be equal to this. So we have here the present prices multiplied by 1 plus the markup, and we have these are prices for deferred payments, and prices for spot payments would be just prices only, and the summation of both purchases would be our expenditures, provided that we are having some people buying in credit and some are paying spot. So where this Pij multiplied 1 plus by 1 plus Mij would be the deferred price of Xij. So what can we say having this assumption here, that those buying on credit against deferred payments negotiate a markup with Islamic banks? So open access finance allows finance users to shop around for better credit terms. So we can say here that both finance seekers and banks are price searchers because we have imperfect information. So banks do not use a benchmark like LIBOR. Of course, we will realize that this would be a very sad thing to do. So they would not impose a markup, and without negotiations, we would have a narrow range of markups. But if we had, if we had a benchmark, but with negotiations, we will have a range of unpredictable width of markups, and markups would be a function of buyers' time preferences and market conditions. So, so the markup would be a function of a person's or a household's rate of time preference, Aij of T, plus market conditions referred to as B. So equation 4 that's in the previous slide would be, that's the expenditures, can be written using our markups in this form. In other words, we can use expenditures or we can express in the expenditures using markups in this form of 5 here. And we can use also the rate of interest expressing expenditures this way. So that the rate of interest would be substituting for the rate of markups. So interest rate theories would imply that C1, the expenditures calculated using markups, would be equal to expenditures using the rate of interest. Interest rate theories imply this, but which means that the rate of interest on money would be some social rate of time preference, would be some kind of an average approximated by R. But the value determined of the determined MIT, in other words, this matrix of rates of time preference would have, in order to have a one value rate, presenting it, We have to calculate its determinant. But this determinant would be available only for square matrices. In other words, you cannot have a determinant for non-square matrices. How do we know that our matrix cannot be squared? For a simple reason that the number of commodities will never be equal to the number of people. One of them must exceed the other. There is nothing embedded in our model that would indicate that we have an equal number, a number of commodities that's equal to the number of people. So we don't have a determinant here. So even with unlikely square matrix, suppose the matrix are square. So there is no market process that produced an average RTP. And here we remember John Robinson's answer to the new classical economics, that you do not have a market process that produces equilibrium in a model of imperfect information. Similar here, we don't have a market process that produces an average rate of time preference for everybody and every commodity. So alternatively, we can estimate a scalar as an average rate of rates of markups weighted in the markup matrix, and that would be the corresponding elements of xt. But such a scalar would not result from a known market process. You can invent it, you can claim it, you can assume it, but it does not come out in the market. So with the new classical structure, so banks are not involved in investment and trade. So you would like to just give more analysis in order to show that the market cannot produce that. Those who borrow buy present against future money. Use borrowed money to buy commodities. They can use money to buy, they borrow, either to buy commodities or to speculate on debt and on pure risk. So any debt value can be used to buy hundreds of commodity bundles. So you borrow $1 million, you can buy hundreds and hundreds of possible bundles, and each would have a different average rate of time preference. So no unique RTB can be attached to debt. So you cannot say the rate of interest on debt represents some kind of an average rate of time preference. So if you use the money to speculate or to gamble on debt or in pure risk, also gamblers have different rates of time preference. And assigned to different payoffs. A gambler would hope for a payoff, and each payoff would have a rate of time preference. And large payoffs would have a greater, large payoffs would have a greater rate of time preference than smaller payoffs, because people would be
onlar emir veriyor, ana baba da yapmıyor.
Aynen o moda girdi.
So smaller losses would have a lower, a greater payoff. Would have a greater rate of time preference than bigger losses. So we can see that whether debt is used for commodity buying or gambling, it cannot be assigned a unique rate of time preference. So they claim that the rate of interest on debt summarizes or represents an average rate of time preference is false. The rate of interest results actually as an administered price by the monetary authority. It sets the basic rate, that's the monetary authority, and banks add their margins. Such administered price is unrelated to the rate of time preference for borrowers, and no unique rate of time preference can be assigned to debt. So we can say here that in Islamic finance, debt and risk trading utilize gharar contracts, and these are totally prohibited. So this question does not arise in our model of Islamic economics. Of course, we are assuming that Islamic finance is properly applied, not like it is applied at present. So the open process negotiations between buyers and sellers to agree to purchase price for deferred payment as price searches in a competitive model would produce a set of markups covering all commodities and individuals, and that would balance between their rates of time preference and market conditions. And markup rates would not be representable by one non-market indicator like the rate of interest, and markups result from competitive price search in an open finance market, in a finance market with open access. So such process as a component of sale finance is absent from conventional finance, where commodity trading is separated from credit. Loans provided at administered interest rates. It is suppressed in the Islamic finance industry as Sharia boards ignore banks' monopolistic behavior, and they set LIBOR or accept LIBOR as an administered price. So actually, we can see here that Islamic finance as currently practiced is as bad as conventional finance. Economic processes to set market markups are replaced by using LIBOR, and because Sharia board members are not economists, they do not realize that LIBOR is an administered price, and they do not realize that they are corrupting the process of Islamic finance. So this can be shown to be a bad judgment on the parts of Sharia boards and Islamic finance industry. Under what conditions a social rate of time preference exists, just like the SMD conditions, we have to have identical rates of time preferences across all commodities, meaning one commodity, and all individuals also would have the same rates of time preferences, which means one individual. And this is, of course, the social rate of time preference in this case would be a weighted average of all similar rates of time preference or one single rate. And this would be similar to the SMD condition, and an economy with one household and one commodity. This would be a trivial case, just like in the case of the law of demand and supply. So what's our conclusions? First, the conventional monetary and financial system imposes an administered rate of time preference unrelated to a mythical market mechanism capable of producing a neoclassical equilibrium. The rate of interest is not an equilibrium price. It is an administered price imposed as a premium on buying present for future money. It is a folly to use as a benchmark or a price, so it's a price unrelated to fundamentals. And monetary policy would not be rational. And imagine the disaster, it is really disastrous to base monetary policy in a conventional or an Islamic economic system on one benchmark which is really an administered and not market determined price. So the results of monetary policy would be unpredictable. If you're lucky and close to equilibrium the equilibrium rate, then your policy might work, which is unlikely. But if you are unlucky, your policy will always be a failure. So the theory of liquidity preference, which is a new classical element in Keynes, belittling his revolution, narrowing the generality of his theory, belies his acceptance to the establishment or of the established institutional arrangement. So that's what we have. And فوق كل ذي علم عليم والله أعلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if you want to allow people to ask questions, I'm ready. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your valuable speech. Maybe we can get to 3 questions from doctors, from our citizens. Join us.
Mr. Chairman, I really would request that you do not limit the questions. I'm willing to stay for as long as people are willing to stay with me. I need questions because this is how I learn. So please give me a chance to learn and allow people to ask as many questions as they want. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. Yes, Professor Sami Suveylim. Please, Professor.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam. Acting Director General, LTA. Please, Professor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ma'bad, for this insightful and deep analytical lecture. Thanks to the organizers for arranging this session. I really appreciate the endeavor of Dr. Ma'bad. He's an example of a true scholar who's يعني المفروض ما نمدح صراحة ولكن I have to. I think he is now, I think 75 or maybe about 80 years old.
83 now.
MashaAllah, 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 Tabarakallah. So this is the first lesson to learn from this lecture. He is 83 years old and he is still doing research, frontier research. So each one of us should take this seriously. We should be always learning until the last moment of life. Now, if I make a few quick comments, Dr. Ma'bad, there are in general 2 approaches to criticize the new classical theory. One is to say it is unrealistic. It is too ideal. It assumes people are perfectly rational. And the other approach is to look at the internal logic of the theory and disclose or expose the contradictions of and the impossibilities of the theory. I found this lecture of Dr. Ma'bad kind of hybrid. It takes some aspect of unrealistic assumptions, but it also highlights fundamental impossibilities. In my opinion, we should not focus too much on the unrealistic side. Why? Because as if the theory says, if people are perfectly rational, they will deal with interest. No, that is not true. If people were perfectly rational, they will deal with gambling and trading pure risk. This is, in my opinion, not true. It's not the right approach. So we should not take too much this aspect that it is unrealistic, the world is complicated, the people are irrational, people are boundedly rational, information is imperfect. So what if information were perfect? Does that mean riba is fine? I don't think so. And that takes us to the next point, which is in the lecture of Professor Ma'bad, he highlighted some impossibilities. So no matter what, there are impossibilities fundamental to the theory that would make the theory fails. Even if we have perfect information, trade by nature requires diversity between the two sides of the exchange. Otherwise, there is no trade. This is by definition, even with perfect information. Actually, as we all know, Sharia required transparency and so on. So trade, natural, useful, beneficiary trade, requires full information. Full information does not mean a good trade will not take place. It's the other way around. So we should say, yes, even with perfect information, good trade will take place. But the theory assumes one time preference, eliminates diversity. What would happen if we eliminate diversity from the system? If we eliminate diversity from the system, we eliminate trade. If we eliminate trade, there is no economy. This has nothing to do with perfect or imperfect information. Even with perfect information, still we need. So I think this is maybe maybe I was not clear, or maybe I'm wrong. But in my opinion, the proposal or the theory proposed by Dr. Ma'bad touches on very fundamental aspects that I think we should capitalize on. Simply to say information is imperfect is not a very good, in my opinion, argument, because it implies that if information were perfect, then we should have one interest rate, which is not true. We cannot have one interest rate even under perfect information. Even if M equals N, even if number of commodities equals number of agents. Even under these ideal conditions, we will not be able. Why? Because by construction, the market depends on trade. Trade requires diversity, or there is no point of trade in the first place. So the unified time preference implies unified price for different commodities, which is not true. It defeats the logic of the market of having a price for each commodity, and that the diversity and the differences between commodities is what drives trade and therefore economic progress. Thank you very much, and sorry for taking much of your time. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much for your valuable comments. Please, Professor Ma'bad, if you have any comment for...
Yeah, I like the question of Dr. Sami, because of the fact that he says if we had perfect information, I mean, that's what I can deduct from him. Perfect information actually nullifies trade. If you were in paradise, of course, you had perfect information. Now, you cannot ask for your way to somebody, to see Sayyidina Abu Bakr, for example. You know where he is. Of course, whether you can reach that place or not is something else. I think I am interpreting perfect information here in a much stricter or maybe much wider meaning than Dr. Sami. Dr. Sami interprets perfect information as still allows trade. I think not. Perfect information means no money, no trade, no credit, but this is something that neoclassics ignored, and they thought that they could still have could still have trade and money and so on with their assumptions. But that's actually what this is the mistake that I would like to expose. But yes, I mean, in the real world, we cannot have 100% perfect information that would eliminate totally trade and money and so on, because this would be an impossible thing.
Thank you, Professor. Also, we have one question from Dr. Salman Saeed Ali from IRTI, lead research economist and academic coordinator. He asked, the fair rate price will be paid in future, not now. So why are you combining deferred payments and today's payment to arrive at total expenditure today?
Yeah, I think Dr. Salman is correct about this, that we need to adjust our equation to include some kind of a discount. But I used in my expenditure equation the quantity. I mean, I defined the prices here in quantity terms, in quantity of goods rather than in monetary terms. So this is a good excuse for me. But if we wanted to use monetary terms, we would have to use some rate of discount.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. Please, participants or guests, you can raise your questions. Yes, from Asap Maulana. As we know that no people still think that the conventional economy is the same as the Islamic economy, according to the Prof. What is wrong, whether the knowledge or the economic system is wrong? If I can repeat, Professor, if you want.
No, say that again. I couldn't get the point here.
Okay. He asked, or she, sorry, I want to ask, as we know that no people still think that the conventional economy is the same as the Islamic economy. According to the professor, what is wrong, whether the knowledge or the economic system is wrong?
Why don't you ask those who pose the questions to ask them themselves? I really do not follow.
Okay, Professor.
If he's still around. Otherwise, of course, people get the impression that Islamic and conventional economics are the same because they get their cue from Islamic finance. And they find that Islamic finance is as conventional finance. And of course, that's the mistake of how we apply Islamic finance. If this is, but I'm not sure what the brother who asked that question, what if he means that or something else.
Okay, Professor. Thank you very much. I think we haven't another question. Maybe we can conclude our program if we have not any other questions. Okay.
Can I have a follow-up comment, please?
Yes, please, Professor.
Thank you very much. Yani if I understand Dr. Ma'bad correctly, he says, with full information, there is no trade. Is that true, Doctor? Is that what you said, Dr. Ma'bad?
Yes, Dr. Sami. If you are fully, you see, this is the idea of full knowledge. If you are fully knowledgeable, you will have been able to plan and acquire all what you need during your lifetime. And that's the problem. This is the problem of this assumption.
To acquire. So this is the key word, to acquire.
Yes, acquire.
To acquire.
That you adjust your inventory.
Maybe I don't have the things I need. Yes, but that doesn't mean having full information.
You see, you are trying to make a perfect model imperfect. You see, once you...
No. We are trying to distinguish between preferences and information. Perfect information, fully symmetric information does not imply symmetric and identical preferences. You made it clear, if we have only one consumer, then by definition, there is no trade because we have only one consumer. To have trade, that means we have to have different preferences. Otherwise, why there will be trade? But that doesn't mean they should have imperfect or less imperfect information. Information is one thing, preferences is another. So me and you we could have the same set of information, but I would prefer to eat an Egyptian meal prepared by, mashallah, very good Egyptian chef. And I will pay for this. I know the meal very well, but I want to taste it and I want to enjoy it. So there will be trade, even with perfect information. That's my comment. Thank you very much.
Well, you see, you're quite right that perfect information does not mean similar preferences. Yeah, this is true. And this similar reference call for trade. But this brings up another question is, what are the initial conditions under perfect information? In other words, once you give people perfect information, they will trade, they will make all the trades or deals that they need at the initial moment. And there will be no further trade.
So there will be trade.
There will be trade in the beginning. Yes, that's the initial condition.
Fine. Even in this ideal world, in which you have 100 years with no trade whatsoever, all trades took place in day one. Even in this world, we must have trade.
Yes.
And this trade cannot take place without diversity of preferences. This is the point.
Absolutely. No problem with that. I have no problem with that.
So I think we can extend your what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Your argument goes beyond imperfect information. In my opinion, the impossibility theorem that you are proposing is more fundamental. It goes beyond imperfect information, even with perfect. The only assumption you require is diversity of preferences. And without this assumption, there is no trade, and therefore there is no market. So as long as there is a market, even one day, even the first day, fine. Even with that ideal hypothetical world, if there is a market, there is diversity of preferences. And with diversity of preferences, I think following your logic, it is strictly impossible to have a unified or one rate of time preference. So I think this would strengthen the argument, make it universal. Now, if you introduce imperfect information, it will only strengthen the argument, right? So this makes the argument universal, whether perfect or imperfect information.
Thank you for making it so much more painful on the new classics. Yeah, I think you just made the argument much more general, and that's unfortunate for the for the new classical economists. Thank you, Dr. Sami Swelim, for that.
Professor, we have another question from Professor Saeed Tahir, I think Emeritus Professor from International Islamic University in Islamabad.
Yes.
I hope I am correct. He says, we have criticism of neoclassical economics, fine, but how do we present the case for Islamic economics and build its arguments? I hope my dilemma is clear. Dr. Al-Jarhi might be asked, how do we start and present the case for or of Islamic economics?
Well, I have given my presentation. It's a case, and Dr. Sami Swelim made my case even more general. So what else Dr. Saeed Tahir wants? Yani, would he like to have a stronger case against in another court? Of course, Dr. Saeed Tahir has an interesting presentation of models of Islamic economics. I have seen his PowerPoint on that. I haven't seen a corresponding textual presentation. So
the term of some economy.
Anyway, but I can see now Dr. Anas Zarqa raising his hand. If you would like to give him a chance to ask questions.
Please, Professor Zarqa. Please, Professor Zaka, if you...
I think you might try to use other means other than sound. Maybe the sound is not reaching him.
Yes, okay, Professor. There are another... I think we have not any other additional questions, Professor.
Excuse me, Dr. Abdurrahman.
Yes, please.
I want to clarify my question. Thank you, Prof. Mabit, for the presentation. My question is about why people still think the conventional economic is still stem like Islamic economic. Is there something wrong? But in the term of Islamic economic of the Islamic economic system, Prof. What do you think, Prof, about this, Prof? Thank you, Prof. Mabit.
You see, brother, our problem of Islamic economics,
yes, Prof,
is complex. First of all, Islamic economics or Islamic economists have been bogged down on methodology since the second half of the last century. Whenever an Islamic economist either talks about Ibn Khaldun and history of Islamic economic thought or methodology. But what is economic analysis? It is very little has been offered. And we want to change that by establishing a new field of Islamic economic analysis and distinguish it from all other fields of Islamic economics. That's why I started with these 6 fields of Islamic economics. So perhaps we can, through this, we can make people or give people a better feel of what Islamic economics is all about. Second, we should stop using the textual approach to Islamic economics and talking as fuqaha. Fuqaha have their own field, but economists have a different field. And we have a different message. Fuqaha would show us the rules, but we can show them the consequences. We can show the people the consequences of the rules. And we haven't done enough about that. So that's the idea here. So still, I think your question exposes or gives an important message. What can we do to make people aware of Islamic economics? Let me, Mr. Chairman, if you allow me, on the chat, there is one question by Dr. Anas Zarqa.
Yes, please, Professor Zarqa, please.
Yes. Please go ahead, Mr. Chairman, and present the comments of Dr. Anas Zarqa that are written in the chat.
Okay, Professor. I couldn't see the comments of Professor Zarqa.
Let me see it.
Maybe ask to you, Professor.
It's a direct message. It says, this is a very serious critique of conventional views on interest. I strongly recommend building on Maurice Allais' approach, who was the French Nobel Prize winner of 1988, characterizing all exchanges as searches for a surplus. And I don't know if Brother Dr. Sami Swalim would agree with that, but we will think about it, inshallah. And it's a good suggestion. We have to develop an approach that is more realistic and suitable to accommodate Islamic market features. And we have also to recognize that Islam does not confine us to financing through equity only. It clearly permits financing through Sharia compliant market-based debt and rentals. Of course, I have extensively used commodity finance in my model, and this is very basic, and we mustn't really ignore commodity finance. And he says also that these non-equity modes of financing generate rates of return and cost of Islamic financing, which are important signal for efficient allocation and are essential for thriving efficient economy along with equities, of course. So these are the comments of Dr. Anas Sarqa, and I thank him for that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments and questions, Professor Anas Sarqa. Also, I think we have not much questions from our participants, from our students. Thank you very much, Professor, for your valuable speech, and many thanks for contributions from Professor Dr. Sami Suwailem, Professor Salman Said Ali, Professor Anas Sarqa, and other friends. Thank you very much also for this opportunity. Give us Professor Dr. Shamil Ojal, or Director of our Institute Islamic Economics, Institute of
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Excuse me, if you can see my questions now for Dr. Ma'bad.
Okay, please, Dr.
Thank you so much. I sent by the chat. If you see, you can see it, or I can raise a question directly.
Cannot see your question, Dr. Hassam.
Okay. First of all, I would like to start by asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reward Dr. Ma'bad on his very eloquent lecture by blessing him, blessing his knowledge and his work, everything, inshallah. Secondly, I would like to ask about making the interest rate a profit indicator or denominator in Islamic banking. For instance, in Murabaha, Islamic banks used to use interest rate as an indicator for the profit in Islamic banking. What is his comment about that? Is that in any way justifiable, acceptable? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thanks to Dr. Hussam Eddin for his question. I think I have tried to point out along the side that to use the rate of interest, which is only an administered price and is totally unrelated to fundamentals, as an benchmark for Murabaha or any other Islamic finance pricing would not be very wise. It's a mistake, and we must admit that, and we must tell the members of our Sharia boards to stop doing that. Of course, the Sharia board members said there is nothing wrong in Sharia of using any indicator, but if the indicator itself is not related to fundamentals, it cannot be used. If it is, we cannot allow our Islamic banks to use an indicator which is totally unrelated to the process of finance or economic activities. Although they may not find any text that is opposed to this in their own divine text that they use as basis for their opinion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. We may close the session, Professor, if there is not any additional comments from participants, from our guests. Maybe we can take your conclusion remarks, Professor.
Yes, I think my final remarks would be to give thanks to my students in Islamic Economics 1, the two courses, Islamic Economics 1 and Islamic Economics 2, which I teach in both ASBO and Marmara universities. They have given me so much help in asking all the possibly embarrassing questions that would force me to rethink and sharpen my ideas. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to ASBO and thanks to everybody.
Thank you, Professor, for your valuable speech. And again, many thanks for the contributions from our valuable guests, from professors. Inshallah, Institute for Islamic Studies will continue organize conferences with the collaboration of Islamic Economics Finance Department of Social Science University of Ankara and International Center for Islamic Economics and Finance. Inshallah, in the next year, we will offer PhD in Islamic Finance, Islamic Economics and Finance in English, also in Arabic. Inshallah, we will expand some projects, some programs, some events. Thank you very much again, Professor Shamil Ojal, or Director of Institute for Islamic Studies. Professor, have you any concluding remarks? Professor Shamil Ojal. Okay, I think he's not here. Okay, thank you very much. Inshallah, see you soon in next event.